1 Corinthians 11, the Lord's Supper, Part 2, Lesson 4. In Chapter 11, Paul is discussing aspects of the corporate church setting. He starts out by reminding the Corinthians of a particular teaching or tradition passed down to them, the head covering. 1 Corinthians 11:16. But if any man seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither do God's assemblies. Then he moves on, our Part 2, to a divisive situation in the church surrounding the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper. It was common practice of churches in Paul's day to gather each Sunday for an agape, love feast. The church would spend much of the day together, so a meal was important. It was before the day of rapid transit, so for some it would require a bit of traveling to get to church. The agape feast was something of a church potluck. The reasonable expectation would be for the more wealthy members to bring plenty to share. The less wealthy would bring what they could. The food was then shared. There would also have been a time, and I think a separate time, of remembrance, recognizable to us as the Lord's Supper. 1 Corinthians 11:17. But in giving you this command, I don't praise you, that you come together not for the better, but for the worse. Paul had received a report that the agape meal was not going well. 1 Corinthians 11:18. For first of all, when you come together in assembly, I hear that divisions exist among you, and I partly believe it. The meal itself was divisive. Apparently, the wealthy partied on. 1 Corinthians 11:19-20. For there also must be factions among you, that those who are approved may be revealed among you. When therefore you assemble yourselves together, it is not possible to eat the Lord's Supper. Some were getting drunk. The bounty was not shared with the less wealthy church members. It sounds as though it was closer to a hateful time than a loving time. 1 Corinthians 11:21. For in your eating each one takes his own supper before others. One is hungry, and another is drunken. How could this situation prepare one's heart to remember the Lord? How could they act this way and then participate in the Lord's Supper, doing this in remembrance of Him? 1 Corinthians 11:22. What? Don't you have houses to eat and to drink in? Or do you despise God's assembly and put them to shame who don't have? What shall I tell you? Shall I praise you? In this I don't praise you. 1 Corinthians 11, the Lord's Supper, Part 2, Lesson 4, the end.